We've been discussing competition in our lives. We all live in a world that's filled with it. And there is a competition that can be fruitful and helpful to us, and obviously a competition that can be destructive, ultimately self-destructive. Having talked a little bit about these issues, I'd now like to ask our panelists to discuss a little bit strategies that help us to navigate our world, in our world, filled as it is with competition. How do we parse the differences between good and bad, and what strategies can we use to make competition in our lives as believers something positive? Carolyn.
You know, I think there are three ways. The first one is to be mindful that we don't create unnecessary competition. And I'll give an example in a minute. But the second thing then is self-reflection. Because I think it happens inside. We become competitive before we even know it. So I think there is some self-management to do. The third, though, is that sometimes we find ourselves in situations which breed that type of behavior in us. And I think it's to have some wherewithal to be able to withdraw from those situations. But, you know, I'll come back to some of those points in a little bit because I want to hear from Tim, too.
Well, you know, I find, and I'm sure most people are like this, we have a daily diet, I hope, of spiritual life, going to Mass, praying, and whatnot. But for me, and I'm a big believer in habits, otherwise I'd never be able to find my car in the evening. But what I find is that sort of competition seeps into everything, and sort of the ongoing day-to-day things that we have to deal with. And I find that I have to take very deliberate steps to get outside of that for a little bit, to create some time for being thinking about the things. And one of the things that I do is I try to be deliberate about, I work at Notre Dame, which is great. It's like working in a park, going for a walk and seeing the campus and trying to step away from whatever I'm working on or at the moment. And even though all our kids are really good, invariably you see a student who's a little bit down in the mouth, who knows what happened, what could be going on in their life. But I find the simple act of just saying an anonymous Hail Mary for that student, just sort of walking, thinking about them, putting myself in their steps, asking for help for that person, just takes me away from whatever element of this competitive society is dominating my thoughts at that particular moment.
Both of you hit on the importance of prayer in different ways, which is the capacity, in a sense, to step back from the whirlwind of our daily life, to stay stock, to recognize, in a certain sense, prayer is nothing more than the recognition that, in the end, everything's a gift. And when we see even our successes, all the things we think we've achieved, we wouldn't have achieved them simply on our own or by our own abilities. We're the product of parents, teachers, educators, other mentors who helped us in the course of our life. So whatever we've achieved is, in a sense, been given to us. It's never ours by right. And if we live with a sense of that, we have a sense of giving it back. That, in fact, it was entrusted to us. And the gospel, of course, says, to whom much is given, much is required. And that, in a certain sense, success breeds obligation. And I think we see that, I hope, at the university with so many opportunities where we've been blessed as a community with some of these students are just remarkable young people and their gifts and their desire to go and to serve in different places, taking their fall break week to build homes for the poor, or to their spring break week to go on an immersion experience into an area that's stricken with poverty or disease, and to reach out and help. That there's never a sense where we can rest on our laurels and sort of bask in our glory as if it's our own to begin with. It's always gift.
And Father, I just want to say, along with the obligation to use the gift, I think it's the obligation to enjoy and celebrate that gift. And sometimes when we're so fixed on winning, we actually diminish the gift because it didn't produce the end of a trophy or the end of sort of a lot of attention. And so to enjoy and celebrate your gifts, one has to disconnect from the trophy part of it, and also to enjoy other people's gifts. You know, to know that in the end we are all parts of the same body. We need all parts to be really doing great work. And so I think that if we're too focused on competition, we actually cannot enjoy the gift that we have been given.
You know, one of the things I learned probably that struck me about junior high school is that I'm a fairly competitive person, and not always in a good way. And I've had to be very conscious about sort of who I affiliate with, the types of careers I choose, to not put myself into situations where I would be drawn into unnecessary competition, because I know it brings out not necessarily the best in me in all situations. So I had to be very conscious about, I was very lucky that I had the opportunity to choose a profession where it's not like business, where you're being day in and day out inundated with competition. But certainly academic has its own form of competition. And you have to be, I think to your point, very self-knowledgeable and pray for knowing things that you can do and can't do. And again, ask yourself, am I doing this just for myself, or am I doing it in the service of others? I'm always impressed with, particularly around Notre Dame, some of the smartest, most accomplished people are just the most humble.
Yes.
And then you start chatting about them, and they're doing all these wonderful things, and then they happen to mention, oh, and I do this on the side. And you never knew it. You never knew. It doesn't show up on their Vitas or their web pages or anything like that, but they volunteer in any myriad of ways. These are the sorts of models that we should look to in asking ourselves what constitutes a good life.
I also want to say there are situations where you want to be aware and not create unnecessary competition for other people. I remember in a big retreat with my faculty early on, and one of our best teachers stood up and said, please don't make teaching into a competition. Because we're talking about recognition, how can we recognize the best teachers, and we need to do that. But then there is a line where we turn teaching into its own competition, and it's really for our people, it's too sacred and too profound an endeavor in their life for it to become competition. I remember I was educated by the Milann sisters. They had an event to honor the distinguished alumna, and everybody who was distinguished somehow was chosen from the professions. And a month before the award ceremonies, they sat back and said, we didn't just encourage our young women to become professionals. We encouraged them to be good mothers, to be good volunteers, to serve community, and show the fact that we just highlight one type of accomplishment as if those others don't matter. It's not our message. And they change that award ceremony. And they then open it up to voices, from our alumni. And I think those are good examples of how ourselves, we need to be mindful to not create unnecessary competition for others.
I think even in family life, I know from talking to folks, for example, if success in my particular job is important to me, that's a good thing. But sometimes that success, which is driven by the idea that I want to do this because I want to support my family and loved ones, causes me more and more to enter into this competitive race to succeed at this, taking me further and further from my family. And the very thing that I'm doing for my family becomes the thing that takes me from my family. And I think it's important to realize that our greatest joys, our greatest goods, are never in anything we can do or accomplish, whether it's academically or in the business world. It's the people we love and the relationships we have that are the most important thing. And to be able to, as you said, step back, take stock, and be grateful. I think that talking to children, who the greatest joy is when mommy or daddy comes home and they get to be with them. And it's wonderful that mommy or daddy is very successful or whatever they do. That's a great gift, and obviously it makes things possible for their children. But at the same time, to focus so much on that at the expense of the family, of the things and those who mean so much to us. And that's why, again, for someone who has that beautiful gift of being the vocation of being a father or a mother, time spent enjoying one's family nourishes you in a way that, as successful as you may be in the competitive world, can't nourish you. And then in the end, it's human love, human contact that is the most important thing to nourish us while we go on about these other things. And that creates a nice balance, I think, in people's lives to remember that. So.
I just want to say, sometimes people feel like they can't get out of that situation. They're in that rat race they don't want to be. And I think there are 3 things we need to remember. Number 1 is we probably set mental traps for ourselves when we say we can't get out of it. But secondly, I think one of the antidote to that type of fear is to continue to get better in what you do. Not so much to win, but to keep getting better so that you have options. But the third thing I believe too is to have some savings so that you could be your own person, that you don't need to rely on sort of a bad situation or a bad way of looking at yourself to sustain whatever you're trying to sustain, whether it's a livelihood.
Another thing is that in the meantime, ask yourself, what can you do on the margin to lessen that burden? I like what you say about not creating mental traps for yourself. Just sort of think, okay, given the constraints that I'm facing at the particular moment, what can I do to lessen it? Not even for, again, for yourself, but for someone else as well. Another part of this is, I think, asking ourselves, well, how do we treat other people who are the winners or the losers? Do we ourselves sort of just reach out to those people who have gotten some sort of accolade and treat them much more special than other folks? Are we really sort of looking at people and saying that they're a gift unto themselves, or are we sort of maybe subconsciously sort of overlaying certain people are more important than others because they're winners?
And do we reach out to those who get second or third place and acknowledge their gifts anyway and thank them for those gifts as well? And I think that point, very well taken, that being second or third is still a great accomplishment.
Yes.
And it may not, you got the blue ribbon, but you did a great deal of work and you accomplished a lot doing whatever you did with the skills you have. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Carolyn, very, very much. And thank all of you for joining us. You can always send prayer requests to pray.nd.edu and know that we'll be praying for you. We ask your prayers for all of us at Notre Dame.